So today's episode is really exciting because I have two amazing guests joining me today, Jessica and Samantha from And Life Happened. And I'm just recording this quick intro, which I normally, I clip things from the podcast so you guys can get a preview of it. But because there were two voices speaking, it was a little complicated. So I thought I would just jump on really briefly and just let you know that this conversation is all about how we navigate our relationships and the relationship dynamics that come into play when we're dealing with people who have emotions, whether it's our children, whether it's our careers and our coworkers, whether it's our spouses and our partners or our friendships, whatever it is, we have to find a way to navigate difficulty and challenges in relationships. And a lot of that comes back down to the relationships that we have with emotions, not just our emotions, but how we navigate other people's emotions. So that's what we're talking about in today's episode. I hope you love it. Apologies for any kind of audio issues. We were using Zoom and some of it was kind of muffled, but I hope that you get a really amazing message or takeaways from it anyway. Thank you so much for supporting the show and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Mighty Emotions podcast. I'm your host, Giselle. I'm a certified emotions coach, and I teach you how to respond better to your emotions so you can feel better in your life. My mission is to show you how to work with your emotions to become more emotionally resilient. Your emotions are not designed to overpower you. They're designed to empower you. On this podcast, I share what our emotions are, how to understand them and work with them, and the tools you need to reclaim your power and get unstuck from emotional pain so you can find fulfillment in your life again. I'm so glad you're here. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mighty Emotions podcast. I have two guests today, guys, so this is really exciting. I'm joined by Samantha and Jessica, who are hosts of the And Life Happened podcast, which I've been a guest on already several times. So this is really exciting to be the host of the party today. And they are also the moderators of the And Life Happen Instagram account, which is super aligned with the work that I do because it's all about resiliency and well-being and stories of overcoming hardship and just highlighting the strength of human beings. And so you definitely want to listen to their podcast. But today we're going to be talking about emotions, obviously, but from the lens of how we absorb other people's emotions or how we navigate other people's emotions, because this is a very common topic. And we're all moms here. And so, highlighting that primarily from that lens, but also just in everyday life, in all the interactions and relationships we have, how we are dealing with not just our own emotions, but other people's emotions. So, welcome, welcome, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
So, Samantha, will you start off by letting the folks know who you are?
Sure. Now I'm, throwing this all together. So, I am I'm going to give you a whole bunch of titles, I think. I'm a mama. I am a wife and a sister and a human being. And I will say that, people are my heart. And so that can kind of get tricky, which I think plays into today's topic so well.
Absolutely. Yes. And Jessica, what are your
Oh,
titles?
well, I did mine a little differently, but it was so similar to Samantha. It's hilarious. And of course, I wrote mine down, and I'm going to guess Samantha didn't because
Nope.
that's how we are, right? We're opposite yet similar. So I am a sister to 3, mom of 5, grandma to 2, and wife to 1. Hopefully that's the norm. I don't have other husbands out there in anywhere that I know of. I am just like Samantha, my passion is helping people to develop and find their own passions and become leaders, but also to feel resilience that they might doubt in themselves already.
Beautiful. So,
I love that you guys kind of introduce yourself that way because it gives us a great starting point for this conversation because you highlighted right off the bat the roles that you have and the relationships that we're all interlinked with, right? Like we're interlinked with our
Mhm.
children, in your case, Jessica, grandchildren, our partners, our siblings, families, extended families, however that may be. And relationships are always the part that folks come to me in emotions coaching and they're the most challenged by because I think relationships can be the most triggering things.
Mhm.
There's a lot of, history. There's a lot of different personalities at play. So we're going to kind of go one by one here, just because there's three of us. But Sam, can you start off by just sharing kind of your perspective on relationships, kind of your biggest learnings when it comes to just in general relationships? That question is
Oy,
clear.
oy, oy. Are we going to spend the entire time on
I know,
this?
I'm like, that's a big question. It's a big question. But like if there's like one thing that you have to say for relationships with all the experience that you have, what would it be?
Oh, I'm going to say that communication is critical. Um, in every single relationship that I have, from my children to adults, communication can make, or lack thereof, can make things super muddy and yucky, or it can provide clarity and peace. And so I think all of that, and it's not communication like, this is hard for me sometimes, but well, I said it, right? I said it, but it's really not about me. It's about the person who's getting, the one receiving the communication.
I love that. So like communication is equal parts listening as it is speaking, right? Because we haven't communicated if we're both not hearing each other. Right.
Yeah.
I think we forget that a lot, especially me, with my daughter. I'm like, wait, I'm speaking to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're communicating.
Yes.
Yeah. So Jessica, what would you say is the biggest learning that you've taken away from relationships?
There's a lot, but I'll go with just an experience from last night because this is fresh in my mind. So you have to remember, we all have to remember that we are all humans, imperfect or perfect. I mean, I'm going to go with imperfect humans. We are all imperfect humans, but we have to remember that the person we're talking to isn't an object, they're a person, and that everyone interprets things differently. So whatever you believe to be in your core, the concrete truth, there is an equal and opposite to whatever varying degree truth to the person you're speaking with. And when we come to a conversation, like what Samantha was talking about with communication, when we come to a conversation, we're bringing our own air quote truths to the table.
Mhm.
And I mean, I found out a doozy of one last night that I thought, wow, this is part of our little conversation spiral here. And we both had very differing opinions of the situation. And we weren't either wrong or right. We just had difference of opinions. And hearing them and talking them through really helped us. So I'll go with that one today.
Oh, beautiful. And what I'm hearing from both of your shares is the idea of safety and
Mhm.
psychological safety when it comes to
Mhm.
relationships. Like
Mhm.
when that need isn't being met, how much emotional turbulence there is, right? And so I'm going to ask you both this question and feel free whoever wants to go first, but like who do you think is the person responsible for cultivating psychological safety in a
Oh,
relationship?
test today, Giselle.
I know. I'm like, oh.
I feel like we should have been
Yeah.
prepared for this.
Yep. Pop quiz.
I'll go, Samantha,
Yeah.
unless you have an answer already percolating.
No, because my percolating answer, I don't know if I want to stick with it or not.
Okay, well, and I mean, because again, I'm just going from last night. This year is 25 years of marriage in November. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And I'll tell you, I mean, it's a lot of work. And last night was so interesting because um we had such an epiphany kind of a moment, but it was during a conversation where we were, I think, both of us giving psychological safety. I mean, like we were both coming from a place of we're not going to scream and yell at each other. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to sit and have this conversation, which is our norm. We sit and have conversations. But when you ask that psychological safety question, it had me thinking. And I think that it's both because my childhood is going to inform my psychological safety that I carry with me. And I, as an adult, have to work through those things, whether that's on my own with a therapist, with my friend Samantha. You have to work through those things that are maybe hindrances to your own personal feelings of psychological safety, but also as an adult, you have to choose people who are safe for you, and you have
Mm.
to know how to do that. And then also they have to be respectful enough to provide psychological safety as well, and I have to for him as well, or anyone that I'm speaking with. Like, I mean, I'm not talking about a mugger, I'm talking about people I have relationships with. So I
Mm.
think both um weighted on me, because it's my responsibility. If my spouse or a boss or something is not providing psychological safety as far as what their responsibility, then it's my responsibility to leave, to get
Mm.
situation. So that's my thought process. But again, I'm not an expert here. My expertise is like leadership and resilience. So that's my thought. Samantha?
It's funny because my idea that was percolating was both as well. And the same stuff you were talking about with that idea of like what my role is in it, I'm thinking of an instance um, with somebody previously and another adult where like I never felt safe, but at one point I was choosing not to say anything. Well, that didn't make the situation better, right? So then that is on me, like, because I needed to say something, and then if it still wasn't perceived and that person decided not to recognize it, acknowledge it, any of those things, then I need to make the decision. Is this, I've put it out there, I've done part of the work, and if you're not receiving it, then it's time for me to make another decision, right? Like,
Yes.
so yeah, Jessica, completely.
100% pass. 100%.
Okay, let's
Everybody
end the
gets
quiz now.
A's. No,
Quiz
that is
over.
that is the answer, right? It is both. It is a team effort. And I asked that question because getting into this conversation today about relationships and managing our emotions, navigating other people's emotions, the foundation for me is always personal responsibility in any kind of interaction, emotional responsibility, knowing what is mine to carry, what is mine to handle, what is mine to juggle, and what is the other person's stuff, and knowing like beautifully, like you guys said, when to walk away, when to get support, like that's all on me. And I think that those are cornerstones of navigating the relationship dynamics with people who maybe are not capable of navigating their own emotions or managing their own emotions in a healthy way, like children.
Right.
Um, so I do want to know, because we're both moms and grandmoms here, how has that been for you? Because if you guys have heard, for the listeners, if you go back and listen to the episodes I'm the baby mom. I'm the newbie mom here. Um, they both have some time on me, so I love hearing your wisdom when it comes to this. But I'm sure there's just so much that you've learned over the years about how to respond, because we all gonna react. Like, we're gonna react naturally as human beings, and sometimes we judge ourselves for those reactions. But knowing both of you, I know that there has been reflection and intention when those reactions arise and when they don't feel good, so that you can choose how to respond. So I'd love to know your experiences with that, if you don't mind starting, Samantha.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a few specific incidences. I had one where I my daughter wasn't listening or something. I know I can tell you right where it was happening, all of that, right? She wasn't listening. And then I got agitated and responded. Like, it's completely reactive, which escalated the situation. And it ended up going pretty poorly. And after I calmed down, like 2 hours later, I went back to her and I was like, Mommy needs to talk to you about this, and what I did wrong. And why I got agitated at certain points, and all of that stuff. And I talked to her for 3 days in a row about it because I kept coming back, kept reflecting. And I was like, Mommy's still thinking about this, and I wanted her to understand that sometimes we do react, and it's okay in a sense if you reflect on it, right? Like, I overreacted, I reflected on it, and I need to work to help make that safety happen again so she feels comfortable. But in the same breath, there are times when I might be like, no, we can't go to the park today. We've got 12 million things to do. And she throws a fit. And I have now, our thing is, I say, Mommy needs to walk away from you. And Mommy needs to walk away because your crying is making me more agitated. And I don't want to be agitated with you. And so for me to not get agitated, I need to go take a breath. And the first time she followed me, and that grated on me so much. But just this weekend, she got upset about something. And I said to her again, I'm like, Mommy needs to walk away, and I just explained it to her. And I walked away, she walked away. And then we came back when we were both calmed down. So much better.
Beautiful. That is so beautiful. And I relate entirely because I have such a powerhouse of a toddler. And, people might think, oh, Giselle's the emotion coach, she's great. It's like, you don't know emotions until you have a child, okay? They are going to bring it out of you, especially when, life is demanding and our needs aren't completely met, or we're trying to set a boundary. I mean, we respond this way too with adults who act like children, right? And who throw adult tantrums. It's natural to react. So I just wanted the listeners to know that this is completely natural that you get agitated, or completely natural that you have a reaction that you're not proud of. And the ability to reflect, like you said, and go back and repair is what's going to help build that psychological safety, but also for you to kind of, I don't want to say heal necessarily, because it's not always about healing, but for you to know, you know, what you value, like the ways we behave that align with our values. It's like, as a mom, I value her knowing that I'm there for her, and I value keeping her safe and her feeling safe with me, and I'm not always going to react in a way that aligns with that, and then I correct it. You get back to that, what's important. So, Jessica, from the perspective of mom, but also now grandmom, because I know that grandparents are so much more chill with the grandkids than they were with the kids. All of a sudden, they have all this patience. So, please share your journey.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a couple things. First, you made an example about how adults have outbursts too, like navigating outbursts with adults. Up front, complete transparency, I am much better with children than I am with adults. So I know in my heart of hearts, children don't know better. So when they are doing something, I am much more calm and centered and focused when it comes to it. But if it's an adult and I think that they should know better, I am not as good with it. And in all reality, adults don't necessarily know better. They've been on the planet longer, and so I need to be better about that. But I was going to give an example very similar to Samantha's. So I'm going to drive home her point. And then I have a different example, but telling them that we've made a mistake is very important. And I did that just the other day with my 18-year-old, and he didn't have a meltdown of any kind. I had just made a decision. Here's the decision. And then the next day came back and said, hey, you know what? I was wrong. And I've been thinking about it, and I really wanted you to know I made the wrong choice here. And he said, you know, I was going to come and talk to you about it because I felt like it was the wrong choice. And I thought, he was so mature about it. And I thought, then I did something right. I don't know where I went right in this conversation back in the day, but I did something right because he was able to come to me. He came to my room, and I didn't know he had come to my room for that reason, but he came to talk about my decision. And I just happened, was like, hey, you're home. I wanted to talk to you about something. I messed up. And so that was nice. And so I wanted to drive that home, that telling the kids that we made a mistake. I'm definitely not perfect at this, and I've gotten better at it as I've aged, because I started having children very young. But as far as the grandkids are concerned, I'm going to kind of flip the script a little bit. And this goes with all kids, but it's something I started doing with my kids when they were little, and when I was a preschool teacher before having children, is I noticed that kids were misbehaving simply because they wanted attention and they didn't know how to verbalize it. And so I would sit down with my students. I mean, I had a huge class because, you know, that's daycare, or with my own children one-on-one. And I would tell them that this is the wrong kind of attention, and that I could clearly say they wanted attention from me. So instead of doing blank, you know, fill in the blank, throwing their crayons, throwing a fit, you know, whatever, refusing to eat dinner, whatever the case is, whatever misbehavior you see a child doing, and saying to them, tell me what you need. Tell me exactly what you need from me. And then I would give them a script. So in the classroom, it was, you know, Miss Jessica, I need blank. Or at home, mom, I need blank. And the most basic script was, I need attention. And then I would talk to them about what kind of attention they need. What kind of attention do you need from me right now? Do you want to read a book? Do you just want to sit with me? What would you like mom to do? And I do that with my grandson as well. But my oldest child was absolutely the epitome of this. He did it so well because he was very black and white. And so as a child, I mean, it was so easy to tell him something and then he could turn around and do it. So he would come up to me and he would just say, Mom, I need your attention. I'd say, okay, what's going on? And I would stop what I was doing because life is busy. And so I think that, I mean, on the flip side of telling kids when we do something wrong, helping them to navigate the right kind of attention is also important too. I mean, they're so incredibly important. And I mean, I would say to them, when they were, you know, after I taught it to them, I would say, are you going for the right kind of attention right now? And let them decide. And they would stop and think and go, no. And it's okay, what do you need to do now? And then they would ask for it. And that was my students, my children, and my grandchild. So my other grandchild's a baby, so she's not there yet. But that's
when did you start this?
I started it when I was 17, when I was a preschool teacher.
Well, what age
you
were
started
the
with
kids?
pre-K.
Oh, so I had at the time I was kinder pre-K, or, you know, like pre-K group. So 4 and 5 year olds were in there. They weren't old enough for school, but I started it with my children as early as 3.
Okay, thank you.
Amazing. Taking notes over here. Taking notes. That is, no, because you know what? Emotions coaching is typically done for children for this reason. Exactly what you're describing is getting them to identify what they're feeling, getting them to communicate what they need, because that's why we have emotions. We have emotions to signal that our needs aren't getting met. And that is such a beautiful example because adults, not all adults learn that. I didn't have anyone ask me, what do you need? Or do you need attention? And so I just behaved in animal instinctive ways, you know, and I didn't even realize what was happening. And so that's what continues to happen as we grow when we don't kind of have that guidance. And so it kind of leads me to, when we are talking about managing other people's emotions, your example was so great because they kind of need to help us.
Right. Yeah.
Like, they kind of need to tell us, like, hey, this is what's going on. Here's how I'm struggling. This is what I need. But if they didn't have that kind of understanding, then, like you said, being an adult is just the years you've been on the earth. It doesn't necessarily determine your emotional maturity. So when I was navigating situations with my spouse, for example, who's an adult, you know, getting over that expectation of how he's supposed to be, quote unquote, was really big in our, in our journey together. So I'd love to hear kind of your experience of that.
Oh, I'm the worst at this when we're talking about spouses and stuff.
Yes.
I'm
But
horrible because I have built up expectations and I have assumptions and I have experiences which show that if I use my voice, it will not be heard. Not with the same individual, but I have experiences where it's like, okay, in this experience, multiple times, over and over and over again, you use your voice and we're not heard. So why use your voice? Why try? Why, you know what I mean? Like, I'm horrible. I failed, Giselle. I failed.
No, you didn't. You didn't, because you know what? We all have been there, or some of us listening are there, and it's good that we talk about it and normalize it, because it doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It's just all of this is practice. Like, until Jessica just gave that wonderful example, I didn't know that would be a way to speak to my toddler. You know, it's all we're learning. So just that awareness that you have that it's not where you'd like it to be, or that you have these expectations. I always say expectations are to be expected. Like, of course we have expectations. We like to have certainty. We like to feel like we know how the world works and how people work. We have a model for things. But when it comes to your expectations, I'm sure there are places where you've adjusted or you've changed your mind in some way, or you've given him some kind of grace in some way.
Maybe not.
You're like, no, never. Well, I could share with my husband that this is still an ongoing thing. Um, but I have to remind myself sometimes that he's not the person I'm thinking of in my head. So what I mean by that is there are times he'll do something and it will make me think of somebody else who did that similar thing in the past. And then I kind of project that person onto him, and I have to remind myself, like, oh, wait, who am I dealing with here? And has he, given me, is it fair to him, I should say, to be doing this? And knowing that he's someone I can communicate with, even if it takes years. Because sometimes I got to be talking to him about something for years before he's like, aha, yes, I agree. I'm like, great, but it helps me to practice tolerance and compassion. So, Jessica, I know you said you were married for 25 years.
Yes, this November.
So, I mean, that's incredible. And you shared at the beginning that you had a conversation last night, even. So, how's that journey been for you, for the both of
Well,
you?
in regards to expectations, I will say we struggled with expectations in the beginning. And at the I think about the 7-year mark, where they say the 7-year itch, about the 7-year mark, we didn't think we were going to make it. And we had learned that our expectations of each other were it's skewed. So and not communicated. So where I expected him to do things around the house and be a 50-50 partnership, and this isn't a negative thing on him. This is just what I expected. This was my internal dialogue that I thought everybody in the world thought as well. And, and what he was raised with was like, this is just one example, but the men did the outside and the women took care of everything on the inside. And so, and I'll tell you, we didn't have an outside. So I was doing everything on the inside and nothing was happening on the outside because we lived in an apartment. And so it was like, well, this isn't fair. I wanted 50-50. And so there was a lot of tension being built up because we weren't, as Samantha mentioned earlier, communicating effectively what our expectations were. And so we sat down and talked about expectations. And something else that we learned was that just because we have an expectation doesn't mean that the other person has to fulfill it. So
Yes.
And this is something that we learned through an outside source back
Mhm.
at the 7th year. And it changed so much for us because it was, and it's a very weird phrase. And I think people take it out of context, but it's, you can change the right person into the wrong one and the wrong one into the right one with your own actions.
Mm.
And so we took that, and it doesn't mean like you can take somebody who's abusive and make them your soulmate,
Mm.
or you can have a soulmate and turn them into somebody abusive. It's not like that, but it was really um identifying what we needed to do in regards to our own expectations. So first we had to communicate them and then come to an accord. I mean, are you willing to do 50% of inside and outside? Or is it smarter for me to do only the inside stuff and you to do the outside stuff? Or, divide and conquer. You take one child to soccer, I take one child to volleyball, whatever those expectations are. But first was communicating them. And second was coming to an agreement on how we were going to fulfill those. Because it's not, my spouse's job to read my mind.
Mhm.
And, and, um, and then the other thing about 25 years of marriage was just what happened last night. Like I said before, uh, the other day, I mean, this is a continuation of what happened last night, but the other day I said, what was I saying to him? Something about my interpretation is that you are angry when we go on these trips. Like you are angry and I'm absorbing your emotions and you're causing, this isn't how I worded it to him because this is very
Mhm.
you, but just my interpretation was that the reason these trips were, whatever that was, grocery store, long trip, dinner date, whatever, they were
Mhm.
miserable because he was grumpy. And he said, well,
Mm.
that's interesting because my interpretation of it is that I'm having to make sure you enjoy it and you are so stressed out about it that I am then absorbing your emotions and you're the reason that this isn't
Mm.
a good trip to the grocery store or whatever. And so we're like, wow, that's a spiral. Okay, there's
Mhm.
no answer here. Like we're like, what do we do with this?
No.
And so we talked about our interpretations because our interpretations aren't correct. So then that came back to what Samantha said earlier, is communicating it.
Mhm.
And so last night was the continuation of that discussion. And I said, how do, like, when you start to feel like you have to make sure everything's perfect for me on this trip or dinner or a new restaurant or whatever it is, something new, I'm averse to new locations. I get a little panicky.
Mm.
And I said, so what is it that I'm doing or showing, or how am I behaving when this happens? And he didn't know. He has no
Mm.
idea. So I said, okay, going forward, I am willing to fix it if you can tell me when it's happening. And then
Mhm.
that way we can identify where this is really starting from, because my interpretation is it's you and your interpretation is it's me. And he said the same thing. So when I start to get grumpy, I will tell you I'm getting grumpy and the why, so then we can discuss what's going on, so that we can go and live in the moment and have these amazing trips. Um, and again, that's like day trips, restaurants. I mean, we were just trying to check things off the list. Like, okay, let's go for a date night. And we would go and be as quick as we possibly could and then
Mm.
get back. Like it was
Yep.
just a checkbox, but I want it to be an experience. So um, that's that's just something that we're learning. And in 25 years we are also different people, so we have to continuously be
Mhm.
willing to learn each other, um, and choose each other over and over again.
I mean, thank you, Jessica. Thank you for everything that you just shared there, because there was so much in there that I want to highlight. Like, how much time do we have? First of all, the expectations as preferences, I teach about this all the time. Like, our expectations are what we would like, they are what we would prefer, but they're not something that we can, be a dictator about.
Right.
So
Yeah.
accepting that, absolutely. Also, what you just said at the end about us changing, like even with my kid, like she's a different child at 2.5 than she was a year ago. Like it's
Right.
6 months ago. It's bad. I'm it's like I'm dealing with a different person and I'm different as well. So remembering that we're both growing and we grow in our relationships, whether it's our kids, our spouses, whether it's our friendships that we've been in for a long time, even if we've worked somewhere for a long time,
Mhm.
everyone has things going on in their life that's going to impact how they're showing up.
Mhm.
So the fact that you like talked about that, I loved so much. And then the other piece I really wanted to highlight was the saying that talking about the absorbing the other person's emotions and coming back to the idea that when we're communicating, like what I found in my experience with my husband was always pointing back to, okay, what's most important here? Like what's most important that we share. Like, we both want to be able to communicate with each other. We both want this relationship to be healthy. We both like, what is the thing that we both want that we can kind of realign our expectations to match, if that makes sense. Um, so it's easier said than done, and it's a lot easier with an adult than it is with a child, for sure. But these are just things that I hope the listeners can kind of pick up um, in to apply to their own lives. And one thing I do want to talk about as we wrap up here is that we didn't really get into is how we feel throughout all of this. Like how we feel, how does it make us feel when we are interacting with our kid and they're not listening and we're tired and we're stressed? How does it make us feel when we're having a challenging time with our spouse? Because I know for me, there's a lot of fear. Sometimes there's guilt. Guilt has been showing up a lot lately. There could be a lot of shame. Um, so on this podcast, we like to acknowledge, the emotions that we move through. So Sam, do you want to start?
Oh, goodness. I think I feel a myriad of things. There's anger and
Mm,
frustration and um, sadness.
yes.
Um, and okay, so I'm a big one for this, Giselle, and I'm gonna have to tell you, like, um, child, like almost like a child, right? I had an amazing therapist one time who always asked me to look at my age, like really when you get to your feelings, like how old were you? A
Mm,
enlightening experience for me. But like when I get into this, I and become super reactive. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm probably 10 right now. You know what I mean? Like,
mm-hmm.
um, but I don't know, it's really helpful for me. Um, and then that's in the heat of it, but then all of a sudden, like when I can get out of it, then there's like compassion and love and shame and guilt.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah.
Absolutely. Jessica, what about you?
Oh, same, same.
All
I
of the
mean,
above.
you feel all of them in the moment. And if I just look at my grandson, because it's the closest to a youngster that I have, I mean, my youngest child is 18, so my grandson is 5, and um, you know, just in the moment, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm handling this so well. Yes, I'm a rock star. And then other times I look back and go, whoopsie doopsie, like I did not do that right. Or,
Mhm,
I have the fullest of intention to be very present 100% of the time that I have my grandson today. And then I get on my phone because he's
Mm,
playing a video game. And then I feel guilt that I'm on my phone and I could have been doing something different. So there's everything she said, from the happiness to the guilt and the shame. We experience that daily in
mm-hmm.
when raising kids, being a spouse, you know,
mhm,
um, all of it, all of it.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think for me, I can forget that I'm a human being.
mhm,
I'm not
mhm,
just the mom. I'm not just the wife.
mhm,
I'm not just the
mhm,
friend. Before all of that, beyond all of that, I mean, if we want to talk about expectations, the expectations we have of ourselves,
mhm,
right? Like, how do I
mhm.
expect to handle raising a child when I've never raised a child before?
Right.
Mhm,
And when I didn't have anyone to raise me, I was dragged up. I wasn't raised, you
mhm,
know. How can I expect to have, this amazing marriage when I didn't see any healthy marriages,
mhm,
Mm-hmm.
mhm,
and I'm learning this and he's learning this. And so it's recognizing that the sadness, the shame, the guilt, the joy, all of it is supposed to be there, and it's okay that
mhm,
it's there, you know?
Love it.
And for both ourselves and other people, and when we're managing the emotions of other people, we can expect that we're going to have our own reactions and responses to that, right?
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we as we wrap up, I know there's a lot that the listeners can take from today because it's always good to just have an honest human reflection together. Um, I just want to know kind of right now with And Life Happened, what you guys are are doing. Like, what's your plan? Where's it going? You know, tell the listeners a little bit more about what they will get from connecting with you guys.
What an interesting question. Um, Jessica, did you want to share, or you want me to share some things?
Go for it.
So I think And Life Happened as the resiliency community will always 100% stay that way, right? It will always be a community for people to have those like me too, or oh, I didn't think about that, or like I'm going to take that away, just to foster resiliency in others. And the podcast is to stay as the podcast, and that's to share our stories, because we are stronger that way, right? Every time Jessica and I hear countless times, every time a story is shared where somebody's like, that resonated, or, like that really helped me out, or whatever. And so I think, you heard Jessica and I both have people right at the center of who we are and our being. And so those two things are super important for us. But we're also, forging paths and working to start a non-for-profit related to resilience, off of the And Life Happened, idea that kind of launched that. And then starting another piece related to people and where, businesses and stuff like that. So
Very
we're kind of
exciting.
forking some paths here.
Yes.
We're
What
very
am I
Anything to
missing,
add?
Jess?
What, Samantha?
What am I missing?
Oh, I think that's all we can share at this moment, because it's quite ready
Oh,
to launch, So it's kind of
yes.
like just a teaser of what we've got going on, but we have a lot going on.
Oh, I love that. And I'm so glad to hear that, because what you guys are doing is so powerful. Even just a snippet of that, the essence of that with, you know, us sharing tonight, like you said, I'm sure, like just hearing you talk about, you know, getting upset as a mom, and that just gave me permission to be like, yeah, yeah, it's just hard. Yeah, it feels hard because it's hard,
Mm-hmm.
or hearing
Mhm.
about 25 years of marriage and being like, oh, we got some time to go, but it's possible to get there. Like this sharing of the stories is so important. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you guys for the work that you're doing, sincerely. Um, I don't know how much feedback you get on a daily basis, but I'm really grateful when I see you in my algorithm, because at least it's some positivity on the timeline, and I love it. So you guys have to follow And Life Happen. I will link it below. Listen to the stories on the podcast. There are some incredible, incredible stories. I'll link some of the chats that we've had as well. But thank you both again so much for joining me and for sharing so vulnerably. And what I like to do at the end is just ask if there's any final words that you have for the listeners, just words of wisdom for navigating relationships and the emotions that arise with it. Um, let the people know. Whoever wants to start.
I had a thought, Giselle. Earlier, you mentioned that you can talk to adults about expectations, but not necessarily children. That's not how you worded it, but that's how my memory kept it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I wanted to say that I had an epiphany when you said that, because um, as a preschool teacher and then as a mom, I used to say when we would go places, my expectation is.
Mm,
So, walking into the grocery store with my 3-year-old, I would say to him, because he was having meltdowns right beforehand, I'd say,
yep.
okay, my expectation is that you're going to go in and you're going to behave yourself and there won't be any fits. And then we will leave. You will get to pick a sucker or whatever, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This is my expectation. And my thought on that was, like I said, I'm much better with children. And I was thinking, why can't I have that conversation with my husband, and not in a directive kind of way, not in a, my expectation of you is you're going to make dinner, but in a, hey, I want to level set. we've found that our expectations aren't aligned. So my expectation going to dinner is that we're going to have a good time and there's not going to be stress. So I kind of had this epiphany that maybe I need to be saying, what this is my expectation, what's your expectation? And then we can come to a meeting of the minds instead of our own thought spirals of what we think is actually happening. And I'm going to use that, but also so that you know that it's okay to say to a child, my expectation of you is, and then you fill in the blank, because they understand more than we give them credit for. So I used it with my class. I'd say, you guys, my expectation of you, and I was young. My expectation of you is that you're going to be seated at the table and quietly waiting for your lunch. And they would do it. They would rise to the occasion. And so, I didn't expect perfection of children. I tend to expect perfection of adults, and I need to be better about that. But really, I'm going to try that. And again, like I said, not in a way that I'm telling him my expectations of him as a human, but of what my interpretation of how this evening is going to go, or the purpose of this trip is. My expectation is blank, so that he doesn't think he has to entertain me and make sure that everything's perfect. And also that I don't think that the reason he's grumpy is because he's a grumpy dude versus it's because he thinks he has to entertain me. That kind of level set conversation.
I love that. And yes, absolutely. I want you to tell me how that goes. I want to know the update on that, because
Okay.
I can say that, it's something that we don't think about doing, but it's such a simple and effective form of communication, but also to set the intention, because just announcing that is like, okay, well, now he gets to decide if he also wants the evening to be enjoyable,
Right.
and participate in that. So I love that so much. Thank you, Jessica. And
You're
Samantha,
welcome.
any parting words?
Oh gosh, I think just, I keep listening to all of these things that you both are saying, and just the reminder that we're all human. We're all successful and messing up at the exact same time. And so really just allowing ourselves more grace in those instances that, yeah, I might do something and mess it up, and that's okay. Because I'm a human and I will reflect on it and think on it and make it different, it's okay.
Yes, self-compassion is the key. Thank you both so much for sharing your time with me. And I can't wait to hear the feedback on this episode. If you guys have enjoyed this episode, rate us on Spotify, let me know, leave a review on Apple, and do the same for the And Life Happen podcast. Share it with your friends if you so feel called to. But I always love to know kind of what your biggest takeaways were from this episode. And even if that's just being kinder to yourself, that is the point. So with that, sending you all love. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It would mean so much if you could subscribe, leave a review, share with your friends and family, and let me know what you think by going to my Instagram at mighty_emotions and connecting with me and letting me know what you loved about today's episode. It really means a lot that you support this podcast, and I love coming to you each week with a new episode. So be sure to subscribe, let me know what you think, and take care of yourself.